Right, is everyone back in the room? I think we are. So, hello, welcome back everyone. I hope you had some good chats. We very much took on the feedback from last year's event saying, please give us a good chunk of time to talk to each other. And so I hope that we have provided that to you. I was just briefly saying that we are not going to have a long feedback session, but we've asked the board members, or in Amanda's case, because our board member had to fall out due to connection problems, the facilitator of the 6 groups, to just feedback 3 key points, one for each of the 3 questions that were posed. So I am going to not pick on Amanda first, because I hope that hasn't come as a shock to you, Amanda, but I'll come to you last to give you a bit of a chance, just in case. So Ian, I'm going to come to you first, and you were in the rural and social isolation group, I believe.
Yeah. In terms of the influencing the policymakers, it won't come as a surprise that, you know, we acknowledge Vaughan's role in terms of being able to influence at a national, regional level. In terms of the local area, though, we did acknowledge we've got a good window of opportunity at the moment, following on from all the partnership work with some of the policymakers and service providers during the COVID pandemic. So that we really need to be drawing the issues of digital and their services to their attention. And part of that can very much be about using some of the services of the university to provide the evidence-based approach to what we can do in partnership with them. In terms of the funders and commissioners, again, it's very much around funders being pragmatic when it comes to this agenda and accepting the fact that what works in one particular area of a rural area won't necessarily work in another. So it will be very much about trying different approaches, learning from mistakes, and taking forward digital exclusion in a way that works for a particular place, and that they really need to sort of engage with the sector about that, not necessarily think up new programs. And then in terms of the collaboration, again, it's very much about the sector recognizing that they're not there to compete with each other. Ultimately, they're there to make things better for the people that they serve, and that we need to leave the ego at the door and work together collaboratively.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think that this is a complex issue, and collaboration is what is needed when we're dealing with complex issues. So wholeheartedly agree. Thank you for that, Ian. Next, I'm going to invite Kerry Robinson from the Vaughan board to feedback on the cross-sector digital infrastructure conversations.
That was a mouthful, wasn't it?
It was.
In terms of policymakers and service designers, and how best they can engage with the voluntary sector, we talked about the right to digital. So whether you can afford it or not, that it should be a right. You should have a right to access that. So something about forcing, that sounds really strong, but encouraging internet service providers to supply digital access at an affordable rate to people from specific groups, to specific communities, specific individuals, but that the important thing about that was that it shouldn't be kind of a cheap service. It should be the same quality as what everybody else would have, so not a kind of a cheapo version. And then just something as well, I know this is true, but policymakers needing to understand, being able to understand the need for digital access. So maybe doing something like factoring that into benefits. So there's some discussion about refugees and asylum seekers and the monies that they're getting, how that isn't factored in there, and yet it's really essential, really. And then in terms of what do we need from funders and commissioners, that's something about funders and commissioners thinking about digital in a holistic way. So not just, for example, funding maybe sort of digital skills classes or some connectivity or some equipment, but thinking about the whole picture in terms of if you're able to supply one thing, probably people are going to need other things as well. So thinking about the sort of the longer term and the bigger aspect of that, really. And then in terms of encouraging collaboration with organisations, we talked about piggybacking on other initiatives. So we talked about including digital in things like, it might be, I don't know, some sessions that you're running around health and well-being, or it might be something that it could be like a gardening group that you're running, where you then link in a bit of digital into that. And if we all do that in a collaborative way, we can support people to learn more about that. And then also, Paul was talking but then got cut off, so I didn't get the end of what he was saying, but I'm sure he had something really important to say. So hopefully that might have been captured in the notes, I don't know, but that's where we were.
Great, thanks ever so much, Kerry.
Okay.
Next, we're going to go to Jen Clark, who is going to talk about the conversation that was held in terms of health inequalities and digital inclusion.
Hi. So we had a really interesting discussion about the policymakers and service designers, and actually we had a conversation about who's accountable for tackling health inequalities and what is their role therefore in tackling the digital divide. So we had a conversation about providers actually taking accountability and maybe implementing the accessible information standard to make sure that they're recording people's choices and communications needs. And we had lots of discussion around the role of the integrated care system and the role it plays in tackling health inequalities, but also in partnering and procuring and knowing the VCSE and the role that they're playing in tackling the digital divide. And what's the role of national government? Do the voluntary sector know how to influence the decision makers at a national level? Who are decision makers listening to in relation to health inequalities and the digital divide? Are they listening to the seldom heard, or are they doing all of their engagement online? Are they listening to the voluntary sector nationally or just in pockets? We had a conversation about funders and commissioners, and we were saying it's not enough to just fund equipment. You need to take a longer term approach to look at kind of community focused ways to tackle a digital divide. And this is my reflection, what we ended up talking about actually was the role of the digital divide as a sort of social determinant of health. Actually, digital touches on every domain within the sort of social determinants of health: economic, education, health, environment. We talked about all of those. So if the funders really want to tackle health inequalities, they need to partner with the sector on a much more strategic basis across all of those domains, and map out what the existing programmes are to make sure that their funding is actually truly going to tackle the digital divide and therefore health inequalities. And again, with the voluntary sector, we said don't compete, which echoes what Ian's group had said. Work in partnership together, share insight and data gather together, which might mean having common fields so that insight can lead to better collaborations and really tackling the digital divide. So that's what we said.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jen. Next up, we've got Stephen Duckworth, who was in the VCSE Tech Collaboration Group. Stephen.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I've just got a message up in my browser that looks like I'm going to be digitally excluded by my laptop in the next couple of minutes. So,
well, that'll keep you to time.
Yeah. So if I disappear, apologies. So in terms of the first question, how to best engage with the Cse sector, we essentially, a theme that's going to run through all of this is around co-production. So essentially, how does that sector then influence policymakers, particularly around the importance of advocacy? So rolling out digital solutions may be one thing, but how we get people to use them. I think that sector has a huge role in encouraging its use and to give some reassurances around things like confidentiality and those sort of issues. So I think that was something that we spent quite a while discussing. Secondly, around the funders and commissioners, I think one of the big themes, and again it's around co-production, that came out was around commissioners and funders, not just taking a commissioner and then evaluation model approach, but actually to work hand in hand throughout the project to iron out problems as they went along and become an actual active partner in the work. And finally, on the final question around to encourage collaboration and other organisations to get involved. One of the really interesting discussions we had was around ownership of data, and actually some grassroots challenges to the big tech companies around, you know, whose data does this actually belong to? So, which is quite, I think, quite a powerful political statement about, you know, how can we start using some of the clout that we've got to start challenging that and to start saying that this belongs to this data belongs to people, and how do we start to challenge those sort of vested interests?
Very good, and you managed to do it before your laptop gave up on you, so well done, Stephen, thank you. Right, next up we've got David Barker, who's feeding back on the skills and employability. David.
Hello, we had a great discussion, many great points, but the 3 bullet points that we came up with, one on equality of access, was to recognise that digital is not for everyone. Some people will always want to access through another route, through talking to a person. So if we're serious about equality of access, then it's not about deciding that it has to be digital, because as soon as you do that, you have decided to leave a group of people behind. In terms of the funding, recognise that the voluntary sector is uniquely placed and well placed to access communities, but needs to be well resourced in itself. So perhaps funders could consider putting an additional line in budget applications or a question in their applications about how are you going to ensure that people can access this digitally. It's kind of a cross-cutting theme. And then finally, the collaboration element. We talked about the development of a kind of pool of evidence and data, so that charities or the local authorities, combined authorities, the LEP businesses can use that data to support its funding applications, because the better prepared we are, the likelihood of a better response. And as this is my last act as a member of VON, I was going to say a really important element of collaboration is events like this and the role of VON in pulling them together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. And last but not least, Amanda, to feed back on the children and young people's group.
Okay, we start with a confession in that we have 3 key points, but they don't necessarily relate to the 3 questions.
There's always somebody who's more of a disruptor, but that's fine.
Yeah,
that's the issue. We like a bit of disruption. That's
poor chairing. So the first key point for us was that there is still perhaps a stigma around this issue, as with poverty generally. So the kind of how VCSE organisations need to think about the stigma surrounding data poverty, and the need, or what the role is of VCSE organisations is in emphasising, as other people have said, digital is not a luxury but is actually essential now to fully participate in society. So the role of VCSE organisations in advocating for that, but also themselves as organisations in, for example, administering hardship funds or other work that they do, recognising that essential now goes beyond the provision of things like white goods or food parcels. Actually, data poverty is now part of that, and needing to recognise that in their work. The second key point, I think, was around the role that VCSE organisations can play in providing a platform for children and young people to amplify their concerns on this issue. And not to act as gatekeepers, but to generally, you know, pass it on, I guess, via you, but other policymakers and influencers to think about that. And then the third key thing, which someone else has also just mentioned, is that the concern that the organisations that are best placed to deliver on this agenda are the ones who are currently absolutely shattered and totally overstretched. And must be properly resourced to do this work. We can't just expect the sector to take on yet another kind of additional responsibility without being properly resourced to deliver it. And then as a fourth kind of extra add-on was the emphasis that that digital isn't everything for everyone, and actually access to non-digital activities is very important for children and for people too. And we talked quite a bit about that, of the sort of shift to everything being digital during the pandemic, and then the kind of challenging and getting a lot of young people back outside and doing non-digital stuff, which is just as important.
Right. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to all our panel members, facilitators, board members and VON staff for their hard work scribing, because what we will do following the event is try to make sense and summarise all of that, and we'll be able to share that with you and the wider sector and VON members and all of those sorts of things, so that we can keep this very important conversation, the momentum that we've been building up over the last few months that hopefully has had an extra injection through today's event. We can keep that momentum moving forward. So thank you. I'm going to hand back to Paul now, who's just going to do a few closing remarks and thank yous. Then we'll do a tiny bit of live evaluation and then we can let you go on your way. So over to you, Paul.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's great. And you will be relieved to hear you're going to be able to gain a minute or two of your day today, because I'm only going to take 3 or 4 minutes before the quick evaluation bit. I've got 3 key points that to me has come out of this. And the first is our sector is alive and well and active in this area of work. I think one of the biggest things that's come out for me has been some of the really exciting examples of innovative practice already taking place within the region, and the kind of connections that we've been making, individual organisations have been making with the national organisations and the regional organisations. This is an area in which we as a sector are really active and making a difference, and there's much I think we can be proud of in that. I should say I've just received an 18-page document summary of the points that have been made in the discussion group so far. And as Carol said, a version of that will be made available to you later on. But just the first glimpse through the number of really good and interesting and exciting projects happening, it's really stunning. The second point, which lots of the speakers and others have made, but I think we just need to keep in our head throughout, is the way in which digital inclusion is a gateway topic. It's a topic that addresses health inequalities, educational inequalities, poverty, etc. And that therefore this isn't a subject for techies. And when we're talking about it, and when we're putting in funding bids, and when we're talking to the LEPs and to the local authorities, we shouldn't be talking with our tech hat on. We should be talking with our hat about addressing the needs of people, and particularly the most vulnerable. That is what it is all about. And we maybe even just need to think as a sector about how we have been regularly badging this area of activity. We maybe haven't been badging it quite right. But the third thing from that, it flows from it, which is, this feels to me like another of those topics where we can maybe be scaling up our ambition beyond already what we're doing. I mean, we've already heard that there's a lot of joint collaborative work happening within our region, within our sector, and between our voluntary sector and the various other sectors there. But when we've been at our best as a sector, we've recognised that we have a power to convene. We have a power to bring to the table the big tech organisations, national government, the local big players such as local government and the NHS and whatever, to talk in a similar language around a similar theme. And maybe collectively we just need to up our ambitions, move beyond what has been really valuable, which has been attracting funding and specific projects and reaching down into the cracks that others haven't been reaching. Let's carry on doing that. But let's think about whether this is another one where we can make a mega strategic difference to the most vulnerable people within our communities. So those are my 3 big points. And then my kind of wider reflective point has been on today. And it felt to me like the morning has brought out many of the characteristics that I'm going to most miss from my regular day-to-day contact with VON. The collaborative approach. I haven't heard anything competitive between the organisations speaking here today, and of course the willingness and push to be collaborating all the more. But that sense of collaboration really kind of leaping out. The articulacy of people speaking, the cleverness of you folk. You really are clever folk. We are a sector that's got some real brains and real skills and real abilities. And we sometimes, I think, do ourselves down and don't recognise that many of the best brains in the nation are working in our sector. And we should be recognising that and applauding that. And by God, you've shown that today, this morning. Because the third kind of reflection I've taken from it is, the creativity of the people here in the virtual room today has been really exciting. And historically, our sector has been where most of the creativity in the world has come. It's how our sector was created, where people had a new idea that wasn't being done somewhere else, and they decided they wanted to start something. They got something going, and then things moved on from there. And then actually I've sometimes felt there's been a period of years where often you could find the creativity more obviously in other parts of the world, in some of the small business startups and in the universities, and for a spell it used to even be in local authorities, and it still sometimes is. But today made me feel if I had to choose one sector where the creativity is really flowing, it would be our sector. And let's hold that in our heads. That is a really important part of what we are here for as a sector and as individuals. So I thank you for having reminded me, and I hope reminded yourself about that, because that just leads me into the thank yous, which Carol's kind of already done. But the staff team that pulled this together has done some significant work, which I think has been of real value. Led, I know, by Anne and by Carol. I'm not going to try and name them all. Forgive me, colleagues, but you know who you are. But it's been a really, really good job done. As ever, the board members have always been, I'm always grateful to. In particular here, let's pick out the funders. Bruin Dolphin and the participants, the engagement team at Newcastle University, who've made a real difference to making it possible. And thank you all once again for giving me the opportunity to have had such an enjoyable 6 years with Von, and the opportunity to continue to have a relationship with Von as the Von president. I take that really seriously, and it warms my heart, and I'm very grateful. And on that note, I'm going to hand back to Carol to do the evaluation bit.
Yes. Okay, you've got one last job. Well, you've got two, one now and one in 5 minutes. So we're going to do a quick Slido live feedback thing. So if you go back into Slido, it's gone back into the chat with the event code there, you'll be able to see a lovely word cloud, and we would like you to put in that word cloud 1 or 2 words of how this event has made you feel, your immediate feedback, so we can just capture kind of that immediate sense from the room, if you see what I mean. And whilst you're doing that, I'm going to tell you that very soon you will be receiving a short survey from us, a link to a short survey that will take you 2 minutes to fill out. I'm sure you'll appreciate being in my position, that we have people that we need to report back to, we have funders, sponsors, partners, all of those sorts of folks, and you spending 2 minutes to fill out that feedback evaluation survey will help us to be able to do that, which means that hopefully we can continue to hold these and host these kind of events for the sector. So when that does ping into your inbox, please do take some time to fill that out. Well, the word cloud is shaping up, as you can see, inspiring, stimulating, thought-provoking. That's all great, and we will be keeping the word cloud open for a little while, so do feel free to keep adding things to it, and we will capture that at some point and make sure that we include it in the event report. So thanks for that. And with 11 minutes ahead of schedule, happy days, always means